Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, here we are on the Friday edition of Open Line without Jack Williams. We're sorry that he's not here, but I am here, your host for the Friday edition, Colin Donovan, Vice President for Theology here at EWTN, ready to take your questions on the faith, on theology, on liturgy, and questions of that nature as we regularly do on this day. And I would like to make a programming note. We do have, next week, we have a mailbag edition. I will be out of the country. In fact, I will be in the nation of Ireland, in Ballinasloe, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in County Mayo for a Marian conference, a conference on Fatima, talking about the events of Fatima, which we're beginning the celebration of the 100th anniversary today, with Pope Francis is arriving in Portugal and making his first Fatima stop this afternoon at the Capellinha in the square, on the very place where Our Lady appeared to Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco 100 years ago tomorrow. So it's a tremendous time in history to be alive. It's a time of great responsibility, too, when we can adopt the Fatima message, its message of prayer and reparation, of consecration to Our Lady, of going to Jesus and begging his mercy for the world through her. Well, we can adopt that ourselves and implement it in our individual lives, in the lives of our parishes, our dioceses, and the whole church, indeed, the whole world. Even today at the United Nations, the delegation of the Holy See, together with the delegation of Portugal, sponsored a gathering on the Fatima anniversary, and our own Jonette Benkovic had the privilege of speaking at that. So a lot of things are going on. It's pretty hard to keep up with them all, but we're going to try to here on EWTN and try to help you with any of your questions on the Fatima message. If you want to call in about that, I'm certainly happy to take those as well. In fact, delighted to do so on this vigil of the anniversary. So I'm here with, of course, our regular producer, Elena Rodriguez. And if you're viewing us on YouTube or you're viewing us through Facebook, through the EWTN radio page, wherever you're viewing us, you can send us an email through Facebook, obviously, or a Facebook message and ask a question. You can be doing that on YouTube as well. You can text us at EWTN by texting 55000. That would be like the phone number, if you will. And then you can wait for a response from us and then text us your name, your first name, and the question. So you're able to do that. And we are still doing the traditional way of taking phone calls as well. So you can call us at 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. And if you're outside North America, 1-205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. So here we are, Elena, flying not quite solo, but not with our full team here to support us. But we have, who do we have on call screener and working other?
That would be Matt Gubinski, the brave Matt Gubinski. Screening.
He's here doing that job as he very often does. So we're grateful to have Matt doing that. So.
Yes, we are. And also on YouTube, we have our social media manager, Jeff Burson, Mr. Nice Person, handling the YouTube chat and passing along questions from our YouTube viewers for you.
So that'll be good. So you can use all of those means that are available, the social means, the electronic means, and, of course, the traditional means, which Alexander Graham Bell invented, in calling us on telephone. So let me take one email here while we're waiting for some calls, emails, or YouTube questions to come in. I have no first name here, but he writes, I am recently dealing with the loss of my wife of nearly 30 years. This has been devastating. Will I see and know her in heaven? Well, obviously there's a lot of elements to that question. If she was a good and faithful person and disciple of the Lord, and you are as well, then certainly after death we will be together with our loved ones who die in the Lord, as we hope also to do. And so that is something to always look forward to when somebody passes. It's why the church has the ceremonies and rites associated with the wake, associated with the funeral, and associated with the burial, to remind us that this life is not the end of the story, but there is life in the Lord which continues forever. And so, yes, we will indeed know our loved ones, our relatives, our friends. In fact, all people of history will be available to us who have died in the Lord. And so I think we need to rejoice in that possibility. And sure, there is always the human sadness of the death of a loved one, whether it's a parent, a child, a spouse, a friend. And so we have to deal with that as human beings do, with our tears, with comforting each other and so on, but mostly with the means which the church gives us, the means of prayer, of masses offered, of rosaries offered, and so on. So all of these things, the human comfort and the spiritual comfort which the church and the sacraments gives, all of this should lessen the blow. It's not going to take it away, but it should indeed lessen it, and keep us having that sense of closeness to the one who has died, by bringing us closer to the Lord as they are now. So I think we can take our first break here, our so-called soft break, and when we return, we'll be prepared to take your calls. So 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396, or send us a message on YouTube and social media, on Facebook, and by text.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
Monday mornings sometimes make me say, Lord, have mercy, give me the strength. And so let's remember that after every Good Friday is the Easter Sunday. And guess what? After every Monday is going to be another Sunday.
To quote St. Paul from Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice.
Iterum dico vobis.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Podcasting is an easy way to automatically receive your favorite EWTN programs on your mobile device. Visit EWTN.com/podcast and enjoy your favorite EWTN shows on your mobile phone right now.
Dr. Ray Guarendi.
When did you come to the faith? I came to the faith when my kids were teenagers, or when they were grown. That's a source of guilt. Why couldn't I come to the faith so I could raise them in the faith? Okay, be grateful that you came to the faith when you did. The timing is not always ours. Now, since you're deeper in the faith, you can do one thing that you wouldn't have done before. You can pray for the children. Be grateful that you came to the faith at some point. Let the children see what mom is like now, what dad is like now, compared to how they were raised before mom or dad came to the faith. Not a source of guilt, source of gratitude.
This is Bishop Paul Bradley of the Diocese of Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Hi, this is Tim Staples from Catholic Answers Live.
This is Father John Ricardo. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
And we're back to the Friday edition here, without Jack Williams, but we'll putter on without him. And so I would point you, there will be some Fatima coverage yet this afternoon at, I believe it begins at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The Holy Father will go for the Rosary Vigil, which is traditional the night before the the celebrations of the 13th. And so you obviously be carrying that across the board here on EWTN, on all of our satellites and all of our channels. But you can find and verify those times, obviously, on EWTN.com, whether on the TV or the radio pages, but also on the EWTN Fatima mini site, which is at EWTN.com/Fatima. EWTN.com/Fatima. There we have the texts that are recorded in the various official examinations of Sister Lucia and the children regarding the apparitions shortly after they took place in the teens and the 20s of the 20th century. And we have that information and other things there for you. So I hope you'll go to EWTN.com/Fatima for that information. Well, let's go to Cleveland, and we've got Joyce there listening on the EWTN app. Good afternoon, Joyce.
Good afternoon. Took me by surprise.
We jump right into it. And I notice you're Cleveland, Tennessee, and not Cleveland, Ohio. So
yes.
Anyway, go ahead with your question.
Okay. I was just wondering if there is any speculation as to what the secret is that was given to one of the children at Fatima.
Well, no speculation is necessary. There was one secret or three parts or three secrets, depending on how you do the counting. And the children, or of course the two youngest children passed away, which is their processes have been completed and they'll be canonized tomorrow, Jacinta and Francisco. And Sister Lucia began to reveal that after Our Lady gave her permission in the late 20s. And the first part had to do with the vision of hell, which they had, that many people go to hell because there's nobody to pray for them, no one to make reparation for them. So the vision of hell constituted the first secret. The second secret had to do with the relationship of wars to the suffering in the world. Specifically, there was World War I, and Our Lady talking about it and how there would be a new war, and that Russia would come up and spread errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. And so that she was going to come later on to ask for the consecration of Russia. So this was that second part of that secret, dealing with all of those matters, which theologically is a relationship between our sins and punishment, not as if God so much as chastises us directly, but our sins produce the weight of their own sinfulness and reverberate back on us, sort of a natural law of sinning, just as the natural law says if you jump off a building, you'll go crashing to the ground through gravity. And the third secret was the one which was written down in the 40s, communicated to the Bishop of Leiria, the diocese in which Fatima is located, and ultimately sent to the Vatican, and then ultimately released in the year 2000, when the children who will be canonized tomorrow were beatified in Fatima by Pope John Paul II. And that was the vision of a devastated city, of the dead bodies on either side, whether physical or moral disaster. But in any case, the Pope climbing this heavy hill and being struck down. And one application of this is said to be the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. Not just the crises which the Church has been going through under persecution and often by her own making as well, with the sex abuse scandal, but also the persecution of the Church by atheistic systems, even by secular and lay systems which are antagonistic to the Church, and which resulted in John Paul's case of the assassination attempt. So that would be that's the third part of that secret, and that has been revealed. Both the Holy See and Sister Lucia in her lifetime denied that there was anything hidden yet to be revealed. Others allege otherwise, and they have their reasons and their explanations, but I'm going to go by what the Church says and what Sister Lucia says. So those would be the three divisions of that secret matter that was given to the children, specifically to Lucia, at the July 13th apparition, July 13th of 1917.
Very good answer. Very extensive answer.
Okay. And you can get more detail on that if you want to by going to our website, EWTN.com/Fatima. So read the text there and you'll see how we have tried to at least point out the divisions there between those secrets. And then, of course, you can read what the Congregation for the Faith said in 2000 regarding their explanation or an effort at an interpretation of them.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's go to Evelyn in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, listening on EWTN.com. Good afternoon, Evelyn.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome. Happy to.
I have a question which kind of concerns me. The church's position on ashes of a deceased person being kept in the home or oftentimes carried in little lockets. I am familiar with a family that has the urn in their home, and the children often take the top off just to see and touch what's inside. So that rather concerns me.
Sure.
Can you please tell me the church's position on this kind of thing?
The church is absolutely opposed to that. People have good intentions. Obviously, they think this is a way of keeping close or memorializing their loved one, in a special way that's, in their family, in their home, or whatever. The church says no. This is not the way it should be done, because in life, through baptism, through reception of Holy Communion, reception of Holy Communion, in a way, the person who dies in the state of grace, their body is sanctified. It's not just their soul. The person is one, body and soul. And although the soul departs, the body which shared in that sanctification is destined to be raised up on the last day. And so, as long as we have that body around and it disintegrates and returns to elements and so on, we give it respect. We give it the respect that we give, maybe not quite that we give to the saints and the relics in the church and so on, but at least the dignity of a burial in the ground, or if cremation is done for reasons, and today they're often economic and not moral and certainly not doctrinal. In other words, certainly not to deny the resurrection, which is, of course, forbidden reason. Then it should be in a columbarium, and many parishes now are having those to make it easy to come and pray at the place of where the remains are and so on. But absolutely, it's forbidden to scatter them about, so on the person's favorite forest, mountain, or beach, or to maintain them in the home in some way. Every city, of course, is different, but used to be you had private cemeteries, especially on farms and ranches and so on. There it's a cemetery. The soil is blessed. It's either blessed by the bishop because it's a Catholic cemetery or a Catholic portion of a public cemetery, or it's blessed at the time that the priest does the service at the graveside. And so there the body goes into blessed ground because it itself is blessed by the life of grace and by the Eucharist that have been received and so on. And that's the care that the church expects Catholics to show to their deceased loved ones, and not the casual respect of putting Aunt Susie or Grandma on the mantle or scattering Uncle Fred, at some national park that was his favorite visiting and camping place or something like that. The church would say that whatever the good intentions, that is not the proper way to treat the body of the deceased Christian.
An amputated part of the body, when one dies, he is separated from, let's say legs were removed and those were burned. They were not put into consecrated ground. What happens then in that particular case?
Well, I mean, that you think about it, that's a disease thing. There's all kinds of necessary situations there. A person whose limbs are amputated, you don't start, it's simply not practical to bury that amputated part. So there are medical norms and very often civil norms as regarding the respectful disposal of human remains, the human parts. And so that care should be done. But the person is alive, and so it doesn't quite merit the care that is owed to the entirety of the body after the person has died and the soul has departed. But certainly respectful and according to the law if there's disease involved and so on.
Very much. Thank you for answering my question.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye now.
Well, let's see. I think we could try to get another one in here before our break at the bottom of the hour. And let's go to Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and Della, listening on EWTN.com. Good afternoon, Della.
Hi, how are you?
I'm pretty good. What's your question today?
Well, my children and I were talking about Jacinta and Francisco and all the events for today. They had a really good question that I thought maybe you would answer better than I would.
Okay.
And that is, what is the procedure for the children or anyone to become a saint?
Okay. Renounce and live a life without sin and of God and neighbor. If you do that, you will be a saint whether the church canonizes you or not. So that's the first step for anybody, is to live that holy life, to die in the state of grace, and to to at least not die an enemy of God. And then you will be a saint whether you have to be purified a little bit or you go directly to heaven. Now, in the course of human affairs, there are some people who sort of, are head and shoulders, a common expression, above others. They shine a little bit more in the world. They do great things. They do great things for God. We look at Mother Teresa. We look at Pope John Paul II. We look at any person who is canonized, and these are people who they came to the attention of the church, even perhaps in their lifetime, with the fame of holiness. In other words, people marveled at their goodness, and maybe there were even some fairly spectacular things. You think of the saints who did miracles in their lives, who cured people, even raised the dead in some cases, very biblical kinds of miracles. And obviously these come to the attention of the church. And in life, they don't really count that much for the canonization. What really counts is, at least initially, is that life of virtue. And so when a person dies and a period of time passes, it's normally 5 years. If there is fame of holiness and fame of intercession, in other words, if people are just finding that, if I pray to, here's a good example, if I pray to Father Solanus Casey, my prayers get answered. Somebody I prayed for and asked him, Father Casey, to intervene, they were cured. And so the person's cause is started. Maybe alleged miracle is checked out and referred to Rome eventually. And what's decided is, yes, Father Casey lived a life of heroic virtue. He lived all the virtues, and he did so in a remarkable way, not in an ordinary way, heroically, doing them even in the most difficult of circumstances. And here is a cure for which there is no natural explanation, and which all the evidence points to the intercession of Father Casey, because this is who people turn to, whom they petition. And so it came about, and the church is satisfied that they went to him uniquely, and the cure came about. And so he's declared, first, he's been declared venerable with the heroic virtues, which in this particular case, Father Casey actually is, Venerable Solanus Casey. And so then a miracle is added to that mix, and he can be beatified. So into the year 2000, Jacinta and Francisco were declared blessed by Pope John Paul II, because the church had determined, after a process in Leiria Fatima and in Rome, sort of a double process, first in Portugal and then repeated and looked at and into the details in Rome. A miracle was given and found, declared no natural explanation by the scientists and a miracle by the theologians, and on the basis of that, the church says those children can be beatified. And John Paul II decreed that they would be beatified, and then he went to Portugal to do it. And then so after that, another miracle came forward, and the same process of checking at the local level and at the Roman level went through, and Pope Francis decreed that they can be canonized, and that will take place tomorrow. But it all started is because they listened to the words of Our Lady, they followed them heroically, they lived saintly lives in the couple years that were still left to them when she appeared to them, and then the church 100 years later is saying they are saints. But they were saints the day they died, and we can be too. Be back in about a minute or so for the second half of Open Line.
What is the evidence for the existence of God? How can faith and science coexist? How can something come from nothing? Cosmic questions that still elude the mind of man. Philosopher and theologian Father Robert Spitzer ignites an infinite discourse. At the intersection of faith and reason, we invite you to explore Father Spitzer's universe.
Friday, 8 p.m. and Sunday, noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
If you want to understand the many gifts God is offering you, Mother Angelica's Quick Guide to the Sacraments is a must-have. This spiritual handbook will help you get more out of Holy Communion, expose you to the grace God desperately wants to give you in confession, the beautiful gifts found only in the sacrament of matrimony, and more. Mother Angelica's Quick Guide to the Sacraments, new from EWTN Publishing, now available at EWTNRC.com.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The seventh commandment forbids theft, that is, unjustly taking or keeping another's property against the reasonable will of the owner. It also prohibits deliberate retention of goods lent or of objects lost. It prohibits business fraud, paying unjust wages, forcing up prices, and taking advantage of the ignorance or the hardship of another person. It prohibits the appropriation and use for private purposes of common goods. Also, work poorly done, tax evasion, forgery of checks, invoices, excessive expenses, and waste. Under the seventh commandment is also tucked our social justice teachings, because if I have two coats, one of them belongs to the poor, and I reasonably ought to give what belongs to them, because God gave all the goods of this world for all the people of this world. The seventh commandment, you shall not steal.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, we're back, and I want to continue on with the Francisco and Jacinta question, because Facebook, or YouTube rather, questioner asked regarding the why isn't Lucia? The Pope is doing these two beatification or two canonizations tomorrow, so why isn't Lucia also being canonized? Well, the process is not as far along in her case. The children died in 1919 and 1920, I believe, where she died in 2005 at 97 years of age, more or less. And so her process is moving along. She will eventually, I'm sure, be canonized in the coming years, but there's no effort to artificially shorten the process just so that all three of them can be done here at the same time. So the two children are getting their just due, the definition of them being with God in heaven, and I'm confident that Lucia will also at some point in the next decade or maybe even less be able to share that title as well with them. we'll wait and see. We wait on the church in that respect. The information has been delivered to Rome from the diocese, I understand, so it's moving on into what's called the Roman phase of the process, and so we'll see how that goes in the coming years. Well, let's go to Michael, who's driving through Texas and hopefully has pulled off to the side of the road to give us a call. Good afternoon, Michael.
Yes, sir. In fact, I just pulled over to get some gas, so thanks be to God.
Okay.
Just a quick question. I know some of the church teachings on the Antichrist and things like that, and so I just wanted you to elaborate, if you could. The church believes actually it will be a person. I mean, I guess a man or a woman or a movement, or just talk a little bit about that.
Well, everything in Scripture, our Lord suggests that there will be many antichrists, but then also spoke of the Antichrist. John was the one to use that term. I don't know that he invented it really. It was probably in the tradition of use. But so the man of sin, the son of perdition, the different names that is given to him. This is someone who will come at the end of time, just before the second coming, or coincident in the events that lead up to the second coming, the last judgment, and so on. But there are throughout history many individuals and indeed movements as well that could be described as Antichrist. In other words, that they in some sense imbibe the spirit of impiety, which is characteristic of the devil, and that they incorporate that in the sort of an anti-God. It's not really anti-man, it's certainly anti-Christ, but that has to be the characteristic, that it's not necessarily a denial of God, but an opposition to God. So it's been traditional to look to Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the Greek generals or descendants of the generals that when Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided into Greek and Egyptian portions. And Antiochus came into Jerusalem and profaned the temple and tried to bring the Jews under control. We have the wonderful story of the Maccabees, the two books of the Maccabees, which tell that account. For example, of the mother and her 7 sons who gave their lives rather than to violate the Torah, violate the law. And so this is actually celebrated at Hanukkah when the oil miraculously burned for 7 or 8 days, even though there was hardly any of it left when they came back to ultimately consecrate the temple again. And so Antiochus is taken as a type, just as Moses is a type of Christ that looks forward to Christ, just as Joshua, just as Joseph and his coat of many colors, just as in a certain extent all the prophets and kings are, certainly David, the idea of the kingship. So you have the prophetic, the prophets, the kingly, David, and also the sanctifying the priesthood, the priestly role that went before Christ in the Christian economy. You have those individuals that sort of look and participate in remotely what will culminate in the Antichrist and the kingdom that he tries to set up in the end, a kingdom which Christ himself will destroy with his coming. And so you can look at Antiochus Epiphanes, you can look at Nero, you can look at Diocletian, you can look at Domitian, you can look at any of the Roman empires. You can add to that in our own day the Hitlers, the Maos, the Stalins of history, the Pol Pots, all of those who have such a disregard for both religion and humanity that they imbibe or manifest in a certain powerful way the Antichrist, his spirit. And so, but at the end, the general opinion of the fathers of the church is that a man will come who will incarnate that. Sort of, you might call it an anti-incarnation. Be a regular human being, but he will have the illusion of virtue, and he will rather be the summation of all vices, if you will. And he will attempt to take over and to put an end to the work of Christ. That does not seem to be our time, however, if in reading the mystics and what they have to say, we are in the time of mercy, we are in the Marian time, we are in the time when, although we deserve perhaps that degree of punishment, nonetheless, we're working assiduously, Our Lady is working assiduously to keep us from experiencing that. And this is indeed what Fatima is about. And out of this, the Catholic mystics, who are blesseds, who are saints, who are venerables, who have spoken on this, and whose credibility is affirmed by the status the Church has given them, tell us that out of this turmoil in which we are in and probably not yet through, there will be an era of peace in which there will be the possibility of the extending evangelization to all corners of the world, something which Benedict XVI and John Paul II both agreed in their addresses at different times had not yet been done. It's why the new evangelization was needed for the old world, those of us who were supposed to be Christians but have lapsed perhaps, and why the first evangelization and the congregation established to do that was needed for the rest of the world, to bring it to the farthest reaches, to bring it to China, to bring it to all of the countries, to bring it, I would dare say, to all of the Muslim countries that now, although they may respect Christ, do not believe that he is the Son of God and the Messiah of the human race. So that is yet to come. And from that will come some other apostasy of the whole world, which will end up in the time of the Antichrist. So we are seeing little Antichrists. Soviet communism was certainly one. I think you can see radical Islam as certainly in its disregard, and it's, as the Pope has talked and people have talked about, the demonic character of some of the things that ISIS and groups like that do. That are so incompatible with belief in God and love of other human beings. So we see Antichrist at different points in history, but one day the devil will make his last great stand and his last great battle, and then Christ himself will be the one who defeats him, and that will be the culmination of human history. So that's out in the future somewhere, we know not where, and all speculation is useless pretty much.
All right, thank you. It's wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, for calling in. Great question. Anytime I can connect Fatima up with these things and clarify what are a lot of misconceptions on the part of Catholics who, with a lot of goodwill. We have a lot in common with our evangelical brothers and sisters today, especially in the battles in the world and defending the church and the various other churches from attacks of governments and individuals and movements and so on. But this would be one area where I think we disagree on the way of the events of the end and what are meant. And the traditional Catholic position is other than what we commonly hear in the United States, where the evangelical view, the Protestant eschatology is, pretty widely known with the Left Behind series and talks of raptures and all of these things, none of which fit in at any point in the last 2,000 years into the Catholic view of the events of the end. So always happy to help clarify that. Well, let's go to Rhode Island, where Judy has a question. Good afternoon, Judy. And what's your question?
My question is about the Book of Enoch.
Okay.
I guess it was used until somewhere around 367 A.D., and then the church decided to not use it any longer. And I'm curious about that, why they would eliminate the Book of Enoch from the Bible.
Yeah, a bit of a misconception there. There was no Bible until the church said these were the books that are recognized as inspired. We have to remember that there are basically three categories of literature. Let's start from sort of a natural perspective. There is the the literature that was around, the spiritual writings, scriptures, if you will, with a little s, that were used, as a consequence of God's revelation through Moses. So you had prophets, you had obviously the 5 books, the Torah. There was not agreement in Judaism as to which of these books were inspired, which historical account, which prophetic account, which account of advice. You look at the wisdom literature, wisdom, Proverbs, Sirach, Ecclesiastes, and so on. And there wasn't any real agreement. There was no magisterium to define it in Judaism to begin with, but then there were different schools of thought on what was significant. Then pretty much all of that stops. But there are other literature that comes along, what was called today generally the intertestamental literature. And that would include the Enoch and Jubilees and a number of other books that were written in the time between about the time of the Maccabees up until the time of the first New Testament books. And so Enoch fell in there. And those were stories that were widely in account among Jews, even if they weren't regarded as scripture. And that includes the mention of Enoch, and there's a reference to it in the New Testament actually as well, to Enoch. But they were not scripture. They were neither scripture by the Jews, nor once the apostolic writings began, the Gospels, and then the letters, and finally, of course, the book of Revelation, and so on. Once those started to be writ and started to be used among the churches, there's developing tradition as to what was regarded in different places and as being inspired by God. What happened in the 300s is that moved from the point of view where the fathers were coming to sort of a, you might say, an academic consensus, to the church formally as the magisterium, as the authority, deciding, okay, these are the books that we will account as inspired by God, that we recognize as inspired by God. And so the first instance of this kind of omnibus statement on the part of any church authority was at the Synod of Rome around 379, 380. And that synod came up with a list which are the same books that are in the modern Catholic Bible. When Augustine dealt with the issue of the Donatists in North Africa about 10 to 15 years after that, and the Donatists were giving virtually no weight to the Old Testament, to the books that we would call the Old Testament. They were, basically discarding them and not using them. No. Augustine called a council of bishops in North Africa. First, I may get my order of cities here, but there were 2 of them, Carthage and Hippo. It may have been Hippo, then Carthage. But in these 2 councils, they gave the same list that was recognized at Rome, and probably because the Roman See was stating this was the books. Now, this didn't amount to the Roman Church telling other sees around the world at this point, in Alexandria and Antioch and so on, that other books could not be read. And so you do find that what would eventually become Eastern Christian churches, like the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, and so on, that they gave a different weight and value to that. Generally, they took more books than the Catholic Church did. For instance, the Septuagint, which was being used by the church as its Greek Bible, had other books than the ones that were recognized in Rome and Carthage, Hippo, and ultimately by the Council of Trent. And so in different churches, they may have one, not only 1 and 2 Maccabees, but 3 and 4. They may have the 151st Psalm rather than just 1 through 150. So there are a number of texts that are recognized in other places that were not recognized by Rome and that have come into the tradition. So it's not a question of the book of Enoch being thrown out. It never was in the Bible because there wasn't a Bible in the way we conceive it as a book. But these different texts, which received variable, independent, and local reception in some points, but eventually where the church took a more formal attitude and said, this is the canon. And that got the most formal attitude at the Council of Trent when the council defined the nature of the Bible against the Protestants who threw out the 7 books. 7 books that the church recognized in 379, 380, and certainly the Trent confirmed that old canon. So that's sort of the quick and dirty of how the Book of Enoch never was and is not and won't ever be in the Bible.
I see. All right, thank you very much. That explains it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Well, let's go to New York City and Jose. Good afternoon, Jose. And what's your question?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead with your question.
Just a minute. Let me just my phone. Okay. It's about the fallen angels.
Mm-hmm.
God gave us a chance by redeeming us through Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
through the cross, and the angels have fallen, and they never have any chance for redemption. And lately, I've learned that Saint Teresa of Avila, during her life, she was praying for the redemption that they be converted in conversion. And I was thinking about it. Why not? So I'm praying every time I get near their temple that I pray for their conversion. That's that's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what's the tradition or what. Why can't they not be saved, or why can't they not just like us humans?
Yeah. Well, with due respect to a doctor of the church, St. Teresa of Avila, it was pointless for her to do that, and it's pointless for you to do that. I mean, here's why. And this is indeed the firm position of the church, and that the angels are not redeemed. Now, we can speculate as to how that came to be. One of the reasons is their nature. The angels are pure spirits. As Aquinas makes clear, they are distinguished one from another only if you sort of it's hard to put in mathematical or quantifiable terms, but in a way, every angel has a different degree of spirit, in quotes, a different degree of being, and that difference distinguishes one from another. Where in us, the human soul initially is simply a human soul, and what distinguishes us is our material bodies. And from that initial conception of the fusion of the body and the soul, we go our ways, paths of individuality, with all of our intertwining of our material brains and our spiritual intellects and the memories and the experiences and the pains and the sufferings and the knowledge that we earn and so on and so forth, and we become very clearly and distinctly individuals. That materiality gives us the possibility of changing, and so people can get angry, for example, if their temperament may be prone to that, and without any goodwill, they just sort of, or bad will, they lash out, and then passion calms down, and they realize, well, I'm wrong, I'm sorry I did that to you. There's manifesting change where our materiality, especially after the fall, causes us to do things which a kind of a clear insight into the truth of the situation wouldn't allow us to do. What the angels had, because they didn't have matter, is they had that clear, intuitive insight into the truth of the situation. They simply said no to God. And having said no, their clear insight into the truth of the situation gives them no basis to reverse that decision. So what might have caused them to reverse that decision? And this answers your question about redemption by Christ, I think. The fathers who have tried to address it, the fathers of the church, suggest that in their enlightenment, they were created and instantly enlightened by God, and part of that enlightenment was and they were created in a natural state of happiness, an angelic state, not with matter as we are. They were created in this state, and they were given this initial enlightenment, among which was likely the fact that God himself would become man. Not angel, but man, this material creature that God would create eventually, would become this material creature, and that they, the angel, would have to adore him, because he would be God made man. And the devil said no, and a third of the angels agreed with him, and so they fixed their minds against the reality of the incarnation. And what is our redemption but to fix our minds in favor of the incarnation and all that flows from us, including the cross, including the glory, including the church, including the sacraments? Because when we turn to God and we fix our minds on the incarnation, all of those things flow from it, from what God did in Christ, and so we are embracing it or we're not embracing it. The devils had the same chance, even though it had not happened historically in time. So in that first light, this was for them the equivalent to the test which would later be given to Adam and Eve regarding the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve had to decide whether God would decide what was the right way, what was good and what was evil, what was true and what was false, or that Adam and Eve would decide what was true and what was false, what was good and what was evil. And this is the choice the angels had. God's way of saving them and the creature man that he would later create through God-made man would be both the salvation of the angels and the salvation of the human beings, both requiring to, you might say, invest themselves totally in that incarnation and thereby all of its fruits. Satan wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. And so he had that moment when he could have been saved by the future Christ incarnate. Now, Abraham was saved by the future Christ incarnate because there was no other way that you can be justified except through Christ. And all of the patriarchs and the prophets of the old law and the kings like David, if they were saved at all, every human being who has ever been saved and ever will be, it will be because of Christ, whether they see him, the mystery clearly or not, as the older Testament people did not, or clearly as we have the possibility if we find ourselves in the right place and time at the elbow of a Christian who can lead us to Jesus. But everybody will be decided on those grounds, including the angels. And so Christ is their Lord as he is ours. And they had the chance to adore him and accept the wisdom of God. Let God decide what was good and what was evil, what was true and what was false. And like Adam and Eve, they said no. In fact, Adam and Eve said no because the devil in his envy went to Adam and Eve when they were created, and he wanted them to buy into his program rather than God's. And that eternal battle was engaged and is still engaged. So with all respect to St. Teresa of Avila, whom I love as a doctor of the church and an example in the spiritual life, there really isn't any point to pray for the salvation of the angels because they either are already in glory or they never will be. And it's very clear and straightforward. Well, I'm afraid we managed to get through this hour. So I want to encourage everyone again. Our Fatima coverage will begin in earnest here in about another hour. And so please do turn in to TV, radio, Facebook, Internet, YouTube, our apps, iHeart, I don't know where else, wherever we are, the Apple apps, Apple TV apps. We're on every platform that we can get on. So find one of them and sit yourself down and enjoy this 100th anniversary of Fatima with Pope Francis doing the Rosary Vigil here in about an hour in Fatima. And then tomorrow, the Mass and canonization of Jacinta and Francisco Martos, our next saints in the Church, the youngest non-martyr saints in the history of the Church. Until next time, God bless and God love you.